Hello and welcome to Saxon Math Lesson 62. Today in our lesson we have two learning targets that we're going to be focusing on. The first one is we're going to be multiplying three or more factors. If you remember, a factor is any number that you multiply to get the product or the answer. Our second learning target is going to be learning about exponents. That's a new word in our lesson that we have not learned before. So we're going to be learning what are exponents and how can we use them to solve math problems. All right, so let's scroll down to our page. By the way, if you're in your math book, you should be on page 290. We're slowly working our way through the math book and scrolling past the warm-up we will go to new concepts. Let me change my pen color to something that's a little more noticeable. Okay, so here we are, multiplying three or more factors. So to begin with, remember a product is simply the math term for the answer to a multiplication problem. I'm sorry. So 3 times 2 would have a product of 6. 6 is the product. It's simply the answer to the multiplication equation. And we have been, for some time, solving two-digit problems like this, where you have a factor and another factor, two factors, I should say, not digits. And so we simply, when we have three or more factors, you just take two at a time. So you may choose any two. I'm going to choose 3 times 4. And you would solve just that equation. So here it is, step 1. You take your 3 times 4 and you say to yourself, if you know your multiplication facts, you can say to yourself, well, 3 times 4, that's 12. Then you have to go back up here and you still have to multiply by the second, or I'm sorry, the third factor. This is the second step. You have to multiply by the third factor. So you take the 12 and it gets plugged into your equation here, and you simply multiply it by the factor that you had not used earlier. In this case, it's a 5. And you solve that equation. So you're really solving two equations, step 1 and step 2. And of course, 12 times 5, you would do 5 times 2 is 10. Carry my 1. 1 times 5 is 5, plus 1 more is 6. So the answer to 3 times 4 times 5 gives us a product of 60. That's how you do it. It's step 1 and step 2. Don't try and do it all in your head right away until you really have your multiplication facts mastered. Now, because of the commutative property of multiplication, it does not matter what order we multiply the factors in. That's the great thing. You can multiply these numbers in any order. Let me erase what I had written here, and let me show you what I mean by that. Of course, we know what the commutative property is in my classroom. We've been studying it almost from the beginning of the school year. Instead of starting with 3 times 4, let's start with 4 times 5. That'll be step 1. So we say, well, 4 times 5 is 20. Then we're going to go back and grab that third factor. In this case, it's 3. And we're going to say, what's 20 times 3? I just like to keep writing it on down vertically like that. And 3 times 0 is always 0, and 3 times 2 is 6. So our answer is, once again, 60, just like it was when we multiplied it in the other arrangement, 3 times 4 and then 12 times 5. So if you know the commutative property very well, you'll know that it simply does not matter what order you multiply your factors in. Okay, so don't stress about that part. Let's practice a second problem. Here we have, this is a really good one. Here we have not 3, but 4 factors. Okay, so we can just break it down. You could say 4 times 5, which is 20. And then you would say, well, what's 20 times 10? And of course, 1 times 2 is 2. And then you would put your two zeros. Here's one zero, here's the second zero. You would add those on the end, and then we would keep going to the last factor, multiplying by another 10. And so we would have 1 times 2 is 2. And how many do you see here? You see one, two, three zeros. So I would put 1, 2, 3 zeros on the end, just like that. Okay, now I could, of course, go back and multiply them in a different pattern. I could say 10 times 10. 10 times 10 is 100. And then I could say, what is 100 times 5? And 5 times 0 is 0. 5 times 0 is 0. And 5 times 1 is 5. And I could keep going, multiplying by 4, the factor of 4 this time. And what is 500 times 4? Well, it's 0. 4 times 0 is 0. And 0 times 5 is 2,000. And there we have it again, 2,000, the same product. So that's how you multiply when you have more than two factors in your multiplication equation. Now moving on to the next learning target, exponents. Exponent is a new word in our classroom. Here it is, exponent. And an exponent is a number, okay, that shows how many times another number is to be used as a factor. And that other number is called the base. So here they have a diagram with 5 written a little bit larger than a 2. In fact, you know what? Let's zoom in. View, zoom. Let's go in a little closer so we can see a nice up-close version of this. Here's the 5. It's slightly larger than the 2, and the 2 you notice is kind of floating up in the air, kind of like where the apostrophe would be. So 5 is called the base, and then 2 is called the exponent. So what does that mean? Because we're talking in math language, so we have to understand what we're talking about. 5 simply means, the base means that's your factor. So you would write down the number 5. And the 2, the exponent, tells you how many times that digit, that factor, is going to appear in your equation. So if you have a 2, then you're going to write 2 5s and multiply them together. 5 with an exponent of 2, or we would say squared, means 5 times 5. They're the same thing. Remember, the equal sign means the same as? Well, writing the equation 5 squared is the same as 5 times 5. They both equal 25. That's a little confusing at first, mostly because of the new language that we're using, the new terms, exponent and base. But the concept is very simple. Look here at this example. Once you understand the language, you have 5 squared, so I see at the 2, and that tells me I have to write 5 2 times. So I would write 5 times 5. This 2 tells me I have to have 1, 2 of the base, the 5. Then the 2 cubed, that's what the 3 means. The 2 cubed means I have to have 3 of the 2. So I would write 1, 2, 3. Notice I have 1, 2, 3, and 3 is my exponent. Okay, so this tells me the factor. This tells me how many times I have the factor in my equation. Then we're ready to add them together. Well, 5 times 5, if you'll remember, is 25. And then we're going to add that. 2 times 2 is 4. And then 4 times this last 2, 4 times 2 would equal 8. And so what is 25 plus 8? Well, that would equal 33. All right, so let's practice a little bit. I think we need some practice. If you look um, over here on the next page, I believe it is. Yes, perfect. Here we go. Look at this right here. 8 squared is simply 8 written how many times? 2 times. So 8 and 8. I have two 8s and I simply multiply them. 8 times 8 is 64. Let's scooch over a little bit here and look at this one. 3 cubed. Notice that I have 3 as my exponent. So I'm going to write the 3, just copy it down. And then this tells you, your exponent tells you how many times you copy it down. I have to copy it down 3 times. 1, 2, 3. 3 times 3 is 9, and 9 times 3 is 27. All right, let's solve an equation. 10 squared right here means I write 10, and the 2 tells me I write it 2 times. And then 6 squared right here tells me I write the 6, and the 2 tells me I write it 2 times. And then I'm going to subtract. Okay, so let's do that. 10 times 10 is 100, and 6 times 6 is 36. So I would say I'm going to have to do some regrouping here because of these zeros. No problem. We know how to do that, don't we? We're going to borrow, regroup, borrow, regroup. 10 minus 6 is 4. 9 minus 3 is 6. So 64. Okay? Look at this problem right here. Let me do a little erasing just to clean up the page. It says to rewrite. Okay, when you see rewrite, re means again, so you're going to write again this expression. Okay, what's an expression? I'll show you. It's right in math, it's this right here. It's an equation without the equal sign or the answer. So we're going to rewrite this, but we're going to do it using exponents. So when you see that, what you're going to do is you're going to look at the factors, and they're all the same. So you write a big 4, and then you count, well, I've got 1, 2, 3 of them. So you write your exponent smaller and in the air to the right side of the digit. And we would say that's 4 cubed. All right, so those are your two learning targets. In lesson 62, we learned about, come back here, there you are. There it is. It's trying to hide from me, but I wasn't going to let it do that. We learned about multiplying 3 or more factors, and we learned about solving problems with exponents. Okay, so that concludes today's lesson 62. Practice those extra practice problems. They begin on page 292 until you get the hang of it. And remember, quitters never learn and learners never quit. So persevere until you reach your goal, and you will achieve it.